By all
intro
means,
about your bio, and then I'm
Sure.
showing you the mic. Professor Karim is a professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of Waterloo, where he has raised more than 20 million research grant funding, trained over 50 PhD and master students. I am one of them. Has co-authored more than 300 publications and 80 patents. He received his undergrad from computer engineering and PhD in electrical engineering from University of Waterloo, an MBA in health sector management from the University of Toronto Rotman School of Business. He worked as assistant professor of engineering science at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada in 2007. Joined the University of Waterloo, where he is currently a full professor. He has held administrative roles as Associate Dean of Engineering Outreach, Executive Director of the Center of Bioengineering and Biotechnology, and most recently was the Associate Vice President of Partnerships, Commercializations, Entrepreneurships. An imaging technology that Karim developed 2 decades ago is now part of ultrasonic fingerprint sensors, components used in over 200 million mobile phones, tablets. And Dr. Karim is also co-founder and chief technology officers of K Imaging, a company that designs, manufactures novel spectral and phase contrast X-ray detectors and systems for medical, industrial, and security markets. And Dr. Karim is a fellow of Engineering Institute of Canada and the Canadian Academy of Engineering.
Well, thank you. That was a very nice introduction. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking my hosts at Hacettepe University. Thank you so much for having me here. Obviously, Ahmed, for persisting that I should come. Thank you for that. I'm really happy to actually visit Turkey. As I say, this is my 4th time that I have been back in this region. The first time I came was in 2012 for some other work, but then after that, each of the times I've come at Ahmed's request. I'm very happy I met with Ahmed's group earlier. Really fantastic work you guys are setting up here. It sounds like it's going to be world class. And thank you all for attending. The work that I'm going to talk about today, it's done partly at the university and partly through my startup company, KA Imaging. So you will see references to KA Imaging here and there. KA Imaging came out of my research maybe about 10 years ago. And we started to build novel X-ray devices and systems. And so those devices and systems are now being used in probably about half a dozen countries around the world. And we'll talk a little bit about why they're novel. So I'll start out by saying that X-ray imaging sensor technology, it's still sitting in the 19th century. You know, maybe it's odd of me to make this statement, but I feel like a lot of the most interesting advances in science and technology came until maybe about 1950, 1960. Since then, there have been a lot of theoretical developments, but there hasn't been something, what I would say is fundamentally earth-shattering or changing. And maybe it's because of a variety of reasons. But X-ray is one of those, okay? Röntgen kind of accidentally discovered X-ray in 1895 when he was sitting in his lab playing with Crookes tube to look at electrons, sees a shadowing on some photographic film, and calls it the X-ray because he didn't know what to call it. And Marie Curie actually used it practically in the beginning. She used to drive around these little ambulances in World War I, taking images of wounded soldiers, right? But if you look at X-ray today, it's still the same black and white X-ray. The X-ray generation process is still the same Bremsstrahlung. The information contained in your conventional X-ray is the same that you had before. So I could even be provocative and say, even from a diagnostic perspective, X-ray has not really changed in 100 years. It is still sitting in the early 19th century, okay? And that means it's saddled with the baggage of the 19th century. So what do I mean by that? An X-ray gives you some shadow inside the body, so I can make out some shape. And if I can understand the shape, maybe I can figure out what the object is. So if I look at this bag, it's very easy for me to say, oh, this is a butter knife, this is a cell phone, this is a box cutter, but actually I don't know what this square thing is. It's really hard for me to tell. And I'm not sure what this rectangle thing is, and God knows what this circle thing is. I mean, because the only information you get from the X-ray is black and white and grayscale. So based on the grayscale and the shape, you have to make a guess as to what it is. And that's, of course, the limitation for X-ray, and this is why modalities such as computer tomography, MRI, ultrasound, they have kind of provided additional information, so people go to that. So this is, in a sense, a challenge. And by the way, the best AI still cannot figure out what that is. Okay? Because you will show the AI a square that has the same grayscale as a piece of metal, and they're like, I don't know what it is. It could be a thick sheet of plastic, it could be a thin sheet of metal, or it could be a piece of explosive. Who knows? So the future of X-ray, if X-ray is going to continue to be used, has to go towards providing more information. Okay? And what I mean by more information is something that allows us to quantify something about the material. And so what we do is X-ray sensors that, in addition to the shape information that you typically get, we also have sensors that provide quantitative information, and it's done in two ways. One is a spectral technology, and one is phase contrast technology, and they both provide quantitativeness in some way. So if you look at spectral technology, you are able to find material identification. That's one of the nice things about spectral. Take, for example, these images all taken with spectral technology. This is a bag, the same one that you see, and you notice that the phone is blue, the box cutter is blue, the knife is blue, but the square, the rectangle, and the circle are all green. And everything in the background is orange. Now, by the way, if any of you have ever been to an airport, you know your bag, when it goes through the scanner, gives the same color output. That color allows you to identify atomic number. So in this case, the green things are materials with an atomic number between 10, 11, and 19, roughly speaking. Okay? So I still can't tell you what the object is, but I can tell you it's a square with an atomic number between 11 and 19, and that is more quantitative than just a square. Okay? And at the airport, I would get pulled over. They will say, what have you got that has an atomic number between 11 and 19? Because, ammonia might fall into that category. RDX could fall into that category, etc., etc. Okay? I'll get to the human chest in a bit, but this is kind of an exaggeration of colorizing the chest, but we'll get to that. But this is another example that's, in this case, this is actually an explosive, and the green is all explosive. Now, if we talk about phase contrast, so how did we do that? We looked at the spectral information in the X-ray. When you talk about phase contrast, you're looking at the phase information in the X-ray, because you recognize that X-ray is electromagnetic radiation, and it has energy and phase components and amplitude components. Röntgen only ever made use of the amplitude component. He never looked at the spectral part of it, and for sure, he never looked at the phase part of it. Okay? So that's where we're coming in. We are now saying, yes, the amplitude is one part of the big picture, just like in AM, FM radio, but you also have phase that can give you more information in some ways. So we'll come to that in a bit, but phase lets you do a lot of interesting things too. Okay, so just a little bit about this type of technology. Because it gives you all this information, some of our spectral technology or detector was the first X-ray in space. It went through SpaceX in April, spent 3.5 days orbiting the Earth. First medical X-ray images were taken and tweeted using Twitter on somebody's cell phone while they were still in space. It was really funny. What's really interesting is they did the first quantitative measurement of bone density while in space. So that was something very nice. There's our detector, and that's the one that went up there. Okay, let's talk about spectral X-ray a little bit. So when I said X-ray hasn't really changed, it's not that people never tried to change it. In the 1970s, a bunch of researchers started to play around with multiple energies. It was the first foray into spectral imaging, if you will. What they did is a technology called dual energy subtraction, and it uses two separate energies, a low kV and a high kV, and then it does a weighted logarithmic subtraction between two images. Why is dual energy more accurate? Because it contains this quantitative information about material, atomic number. For example, when you do that subtraction with the correct weights, you can create an image that has no calcium in the image, and you can create an image that has no water in the image. This is the soft tissue image, this is the hard tissue image. But it's really a material subtracted image. You have calcium subtraction, water subtraction. It's quite an unusual effect, but that's exactly what dual energy did. This technology didn't really make it to prime time for a variety of reasons, but it's not like people hadn't thought of it. They did think of it. How does it work? Very easy. This graph is just showing you attenuation coefficients of X-ray as a function of energy. And these three lines here are describing the attenuation coefficient for soft tissue water. Red is bone or calcium, and blue is iodine. And so if you notice, at 60 kV, they have one attenuation coefficient, and at 100 kV, they have another attenuation coefficient. So if I have two images, one at 60 kV, one at 100 kV, then I can solve a simultaneous equation to help me derive the two atomic numbers involved. So this has a limited set of applications. The human body is primarily comprised of water and calcium. Those are the two major materials in the body. So I can do a subtraction and separate calcium from water, bone from soft tissue. That's basically how the technology works. Okay, I'll skip through some of this. Okay, now I mentioned that this technology, this dual energy, even though 1970s people were doing it, it never really made it to prime time. It never really did well. And that's because they were using a technological approach called dual exposure. So as we know with technology, sometimes you think about it and you try things out, but if it's not well aligned to the needs of the user, then it never gets adopted. So dual energy historically was never adopted because it was incompatible with how the clinicians and the hospitals use the X-ray. So what these guys wanted to do was, instead of giving you one X-ray, they want to give you two. That's a problem. People don't want two X-rays, they just want one. Secondly, because they give you two X-rays, the X-rays are back to back, so there's a small time delay. Your heartbeat is still going to get captured, and you get this blurring effect that shows up because the heart is beating. So now, in order to get this extra material quantification, you have introduced extra radiation to the patient and a blurring in the image. So that basically rules it out as an application that is taken seriously in a clinical setting. Nobody wants it, right? And that's kind of what happened. You had the higher radiation, you had your defective images. Cost and stuff you can sometimes work around if the technology is good, but these systems are also quite expensive. So this type of dual energy exposure never really worked. Now what we did when we came to this is we kind of said, let's think a little bit outside the box. So what we did was, instead of two exposures, we said, how about we capture multiple images in one exposure? The easiest way to do that is to actually take three separate sensors and put them on top of each other. Okay? By putting them on top of each other, when the X-ray comes, the first sensor captures some X-ray, some of the X-ray goes through it and reaches the second plate, some of the X-ray goes through that and reaches the third plate. In doing so, I can get three images that have been filtered by the patient and then by each of these layers. So I actually create three spectrally different images, and now, in fact, I only needed to solve two simultaneous equations, but I actually have additional information that gives me a benefit because I have three pieces of information, not two. So I can do a bit of statistics, noise statistics, to get my image quality better. People often ask me, why didn't you just use two plates? There's actually a really important reason we didn't use two plates. So in the 1980s, when they were doing this technique, they used two plates. The problem with the two plate is the spectral separation between the top plate and the bottom plate is insufficient. There's too much overlap of the spectral information. So you cannot do a proper separation. So what they had to do was put a piece of copper in the middle to create the spectral separation. But you put a piece of copper in the middle and you've lost half your photon signal. So you have to double your radiation to the patient anyway. So it's an unusable technology because you're doubling the radiation to the patient. So that's why we did 3 layers. Now we don't have to do any of that. We capture all the signal and the patient gets the lowest radiation and you get the best quality image because you actually have three sets of information to solve a simple simultaneous equation. Okay, how does it work? I kind of told you how it works. You have 3 layers, each getting 3 different spectra. In order to create a regular image, we just sum up the 3 spectra. That's it. A pure summation. So you get a very high efficiency image. And then in order to get dual energy images, there are many ways to do it, but the easiest way is you take the image from the first layer and you subtract it from the third using the right weighting factor. That's it. And you do that, and you've got yourself a new spectral technology. So one of the advantages of this type of spectral technology is because we have 3 layers, we absorb about 30% more X-ray radiation than a conventional single-layer detector. So these devices have the best X-ray dose efficiency in the world for chest X-ray, because that's all we sell it for right now, for like medical X-ray. But they're very highly efficient. So actually you can reduce patient dose by 30%. The application for pediatrics is very, very easy for anyone to see because you have to minimize radiation to little kids, especially because they're going through a growth cycle and the DNA is very susceptible to mutation. The other advantage is, of course, it's a single exposure, so you don't have to change your clinical technique. You use your current X-ray with 1 exposure, you use this with 1 exposure. And you don't have to change your X-ray source. The same source that Röntgen used, Crookes tube, is the same one that we use today. The source requires no change. So in a sense, from an adoption perspective, this is a much easier technology to adopt because it is a direct replacement for an existing X-ray. In the words of some of our clinician partners, you're not losing anything by adopting this technology, you only gain something. And that's an important piece for engineers. If you're bringing a new technology into the market, you have to make sure you don't take away something that somebody was making use of. You should give them additional value and not try and change workflow too much. So let's look at some applications while we still have some time. In this case, this is a very simple example. You know, it was one of the earliest examples we played around with. But here you have a piece of plastic, obviously with an atomic number that's quite low, in this case 6. And then you have a piece of aluminum with an atomic number of 13. Okay, so 2 materials that are quite apart in atomic number. If you take a regular X-ray image, you'll just get one sitting on top of the other. And so in this case, what we've done is we have drilled a hole in the aluminum rod. But on the DR, on the conventional X-ray image, it's very hard to know, is this the hole? Maybe this is the hole. It's very hard to tell. But when you do a subtraction where you can take the plastic out, then any change in homogeneity reflects a change in that material. So in this case, the hole is very easy to identify. It's right here, because the plastic was subtracted out, right? That's a nice example of material subtraction. So anyway, we had to give this new technology a name because this is not quite the dual energy of 1970s. The dual energy of 1970s was dual exposure and it had many problems. So we call it Spectral DR. This is the name we gave it. And the idea behind Spectral DR is it's a single exposure, triple energy detector. Not dual energy, it's triple energy. And you're able to get quantitative imaging, not just in fixed, because the older generation technology was just for fixed systems. For the first time, we can do dual energy in the portable scenario, because you can carry the X-ray to wherever you want. There's no motion artifact, and it's compatible with every X-ray source in the world, right? That's used, any normal X-ray source. So let's look at some use cases. We'll start with medical, because that's the reason why we started this whole adventure. So in medical,